This happened during spring break about 4 years ago. My girlfriend Anna wanted to do something chill. She had been talking about a cabin trip for months. Just somewhere to get away for a few days with nothing to worry about. Her brother Hunter was on break from school and was staying with us at the time anyway. So he came too. I found a place online. It was pretty deep in the woods, which was the whole point, and it was cheaper than it should have been. I remember thinking that for a second and then forgetting about it. We got there Friday night around dinner time. The place felt really cut off from everything. You couldn't see the road we drove in on from the front porch, which I actually liked at the time. There was a small building off the side of the property, like a big shed, and it had a padlock on it. Hunter played with the lock for a second and said it looked new, like it had just been put on. I said it was probably just the owner keeping his tools in there. We didn't really think much about it. It was getting dark, so we went inside and started making dinner right away. That first night was fine. We had a few drinks on the porch and went to bed pretty early. I can't remember exactly when, but it started raining lightly at some point. The woods were really loud, which surprised me a lot. It was this constant wall of bug and frog sounds, and something about it was actually really calming. I do want to say that at some point before falling asleep that night, I heard something bigger moving around out there, but I figured it was just a deer. I fell asleep not long after that. What woke me up was a sound like something hitting the side of the cabin. I don't know what time it was exactly. Let's just say 2 a.m. I froze in bed for a minute, wondering if what I heard was just part of my dream or not. Right when I was about to try going back to sleep, I heard another thump that sounded just like the first one. I rolled over to see if Anna was awake, but she wasn't, so it was up to me to check it out. I really didn't want to, but if there was a bear poking around out there, it would be better to know about it than not know. So I got out of bed and grabbed one of our flashlights. I didn't want to go outside, but it was hard to see through the cabin windows. Even so, I noticed what looked like footprints on the ground near the shed, which was really scary. Those footprints could not have been ours because none of us had been outside the cabin after the rain started, at least not that I knew of. I thought maybe Hunter had gone out there without me knowing, so I figured I'd ask him in the morning. Still, I was pretty sure he wouldn't have done that, which made the whole thing even creepier. The footprints didn't look like an animal's, but they were too far away to tell for sure. And if I hadn't wanted to go outside before, there was no way I was going out there after seeing what I saw. I made sure the place was locked up and went back to sleep. Sadly, the night was far from over. I woke up a few hours later to knocking on the front door, which is one of the scariest things I can imagine waking up to. Hearing that knocking meant there was a stranger out there, which got my heart beating fast. It was just so late. I couldn't think of a good reason why someone would be knocking on a cabin door in the middle of nowhere at 4 a.m. The knocking woke up Anna, who was about 10 times more scared than I was. I had to do something, so I walked over to the door. Before I could even say anything, the person on the other side said he was a forest ranger and that there had been some kind of incident in the area, and he needed to do a wellness check. I paused before answering, mostly out of fear, but it was clear he already knew I was there. I told him we were all fine and didn't need to be checked on, saying I just want to get back to sleep. I thought that would work because he paused for a while before saying anything. But then, instead of leaving, he said he'd need to ask us a few questions. I was instantly suspicious, and I was almost totally sure the person on the other side of the door was not any kind of officer. By that point, Hunter had woken up too and was standing behind me. I whispered to him to call the police, saying I'd keep the guy at the door busy. I went back and forth with him, giving him answers that didn't really say anything, without showing I was suspicious. After a little back and forth, Hunter walked up to me and whispered that the police said no rangers had been sent to the area. That's what I thought. But hearing Hunter actually say it out loud made my heart race again. I was scared and totally panicking at that point. It was 4 a.m. We were really in the middle of nowhere, and some guy was banging on the door, pretending to be a ranger. I don't know how, but it felt like the person on the porch could sense I was scared because he raised his voice and started banging on the door harder. I told him I wasn't going to open up, and I wasn't going to answer any questions, which only seemed to make him angry. He started telling me to open the door, threatening to kick it down and saying I'd be arrested for not doing what he said. That's when Anna screamed at him to go the __ way, which only made things worse. He started kicking the door, and when it didn't break, he stomped around the cabin. I yelled at Anna to go lock herself in the bathroom, which she did. Hunter and I grabbed some knives from the kitchen and just kind of followed the guy's sound around the cabin. I was beyond terrified, but I had no choice but to get ready for a fight. This guy meant to hurt us. This guy was trying to break into our cabin and kill us. Before I could react, one of the windows broke into a million pieces. The guy had thrown a rock through it. I was ready for him to jump through, but he didn't. It was the most tense moment of my life. After what felt like forever, with Hunter and me just staring at a broken window, I heard police sirens coming closer. I'll skip through this next part. The police searched the area, but somehow they couldn't find the guy. Hunter was furious. He was practically yelling at the officers that the creep had been on the property less than a minute before they got there, so he had to still be close by. The officer said there was nothing they could do and told us to just pack up and leave. So that's exactly what we did. It's not like we had much of a choice. But Hunter wouldn't drop how bad those officers were, being at their job. It was only after the fear and adrenaline wore off and we were driving away that I realized how truly crazy what just happened was. For someone to even know about that cabin in the first place was so unlikely. It was like they had planned it, and what they even wanted was a mystery on its own. All in all, it was a really uncomfortable and creepy experience. This happened back in 2016 when I was a senior in college. I was in a frat called TK, and one of the traditions that came with being in Greek life, at least at our school, was that you spent spring break with your brothers in whatever sorority or sororities you were connected with. The groups were usually huge, like 30 or 40 people, and everyone packed into the same rental or resort for the whole week. I won't say it was the most wholesome experience you could have in your early 20s, but I also won't pretend I didn't have a ridiculous amount of fun doing it. That year, the plan was Acapulco. I don't remember whose idea it was at first, but within a few weeks, we had something like 40 people booked at this resort on the Pacific coast. The main character in the story isn't actually me. It's my buddy Sahil. I'm going to try saying this as nicely as I can. He was the kind of person who, no matter what situation you put him in, was going to find a way to make it louder and more complicated than it needed to be. I say that with total love, because Sahil was honestly one of the best people I knew in college. He just had absolutely zero sense of self-protection and no self-control, which was especially a problem because he was super impulsive. We were maybe 3 or 4 days into the trip when a group of us decided to go to the local clubs. It was a great time right up until Sahil, true to form, started looking around the room for someone who could get him something. Let's just say something stronger than what was in his glass. I'm not going to spell things out, but it shouldn't be too hard to figure out what I mean. It was a terrible idea. We were in a foreign country in a city with a reputation that wasn't exactly clean. Plus, nobody in our group spoke any Spanish. I told him to drop it. A couple of the other guys said the same thing, and Sahil said he would, but I knew he wouldn't. I had been through his _ too many times. We kept an eye on him for a while, but the place was really huge, and after a while, we kind of stopped keeping track of where he was. He was a grown man. I wasn't about to waste my night babysitting him. I figured he was somewhere in the crowd. Sahil disappearing into a crowd was not unusual. I went on with my night with my other friends, and it was a great time. Sahil never showed up, though, which I found stranger and stranger as it got later. I don't remember what set it off, but one second we were all drinking and partying, having a good time, and the next we were all frantically trying to reach Sahil. He wasn't answering anyone's text messages, and when we called his phone, it went straight to voicemail, meaning it was dead. That wasn't good. Sahil may have been a crazy guy, but he was super organized. He wouldn't just let his phone die like that. After a little while longer, we made the call to leave. Chances were he was back at the resort, and we'd find him passed out in his bed. The sidewalk outside was a mess of people trying to get cabs all at once. So a few of us walked about a block and a half before pulling out our phones to call a driver. It was probably around 1 a.m, so we were just standing there waiting on a driver. When who do we see but Sahil stumbling toward us out of the darkness? We ran up to him, and it was right away clear that something seriously bad had happened. He was a complete mess. His shirt was ripped almost all the way off, and his face was completely swollen. Not to mention the fact that he was limping. We got him into the car and back to the resort. A couple of guys kept asking him what happened, and he kept saying he'd explain later. It wasn't until we were back in one of the rooms that he finally started talking. Here's what he told us. He found a guy near the bar, this short Mexican guy who didn't speak much English. He had a friend with him who was supposedly doing the translating. Sahil made it clear what he was looking for, and the guy understood. Sahil told us he was unsure right away because something felt off about the translator specifically, but he couldn't figure out what. Then the short guy pulled out a small sample and offered it to him right there, and Sahil tried it. He said it was good, and that's kind of where his judgment went out the window. After that, the short guy said he couldn't do business inside the club and told Sahil to come outside with him. Sahil knew he shouldn't have gone, but he went anyway, which I mean, what do you even say to that? They walked out a side door, and there was a car waiting just outside the door. Before Sahil really understood what was happening, they were already pulling him into the back seat. They drove. He said it felt like maybe 15 or 20 minutes, but he was panicking and not exactly thinking straight. So he honestly wasn't sure. What he was sure about was that they went digging through his pockets the second the car started moving. They robbed him, and when he tried to fight back, they beat him senseless. They destroyed his phone and took everything of value from him. What saved him was that at some point during the drive, one of the guys asked him why there were so many Americans in the city right now. And Sahil, without really thinking about it, explained that he was there on spring break with dozens of other students from the same university who were all staying at the same resort. He had no idea at the time that he was basically talking his way out of being killed or trafficked. The two guys went back and forth in Spanish for a while after that. Then the car pulled over and they threw him out. He landed on some random road he didn't recognize and just started walking. He didn't know where he was, so he had no choice but to just walk in the direction he thought the car had driven. And by some miracle, it turned out to be the right choice. I really don't know what would have happened to him if he hadn't run into us, or if he had left the club 20 minutes earlier. We talked about calling the police for about 3 seconds before all agreeing that was probably the worst idea for everyone involved, Sahil included, besides the guys in our close group. Nobody at the resort ever found out what happened. I've been holding this one in for quite a while now. This happened during spring break of my junior year. I graduated a while ago, so we're going back a few years here. I should mention that I'm kind of a paranoid person. I've just always been naturally watchful, doubtful, and cynical. Those honestly aren't the healthiest traits to have. I end up spending a lot of time overthinking and worrying about things that don't matter. But I can't help it. My ex-girlfriend Anna had this friend named Lena. Lena was the type of girl who always knew where the party was and was plugged into every group chat and friend circle you could think of, which is why it wasn't surprising at all when she came to Anna with a spring break plan. She said a girl she knew had told her about a lake house trip out in the Ozarks. According to Lena, a bunch of people from that girl's sorority and some of the connected frats were renting this big house on the water for the week. Pretty standard, to be totally honest. I wasn't exactly the spring break type, but Anna really wanted to go, and I didn't have a reason not to, so I figured what the heck. There were 4 of us. Me, Anna, Lena, and Lena's boyfriend, Colby. Colby chose to drive because he had the biggest car, which was pretty cool of him. It was a long but good drive. Everyone was in a good mood. The last stretch was this long, twisting road that didn't have many houses on it. We pulled up the house around 5 in the afternoon, and my first thought was that Lena had really undersold it. The place was huge, right on the lake with this giant wraparound deck and a dock that went way out over the water. It was the kind of house that makes you wonder who actually owns it. There were also way more cars in the front of the house than I was expecting. Lena had made it sound like there'd only be 15 to 20 people, but I counted at least 25 cars in the grass lot next to the house, with more parked down the road, because there wasn't room. That's where Colby had to park. We walked up the front steps and saw a guy standing near the front door. He seemed to be about our age, or maybe a little older. He told us his name, but I don't remember it, so I'll just call him the host. He seemed friendly enough, but the very first thing I noticed about him was that his speech seemed practiced, like he'd had this exact conversation many times. And to be fair, he probably had, but it still felt weird to me. You know those safety speeches frat pledges have to give before letting you into a party? It felt kind of like that. He gave us the rundown. He told us where to find our rooms, how to get around the house, when we could do this or that. Typical house rule stuff like that. Then he brought up the car keys. He said the roads around the lake were narrow and dangerous at night, especially after people had been drinking. He told us it was a liability thing, and that they were collecting everyone's keys at the door. He had this whole little speech about it. Colby kind of shrugged it off before handing his keys over. The host made a big show of thanking Colby for following the rules, which I thought was kind of annoying. Then he opened the door and let us in. I made a mental note of what he was doing with the car keys, and I was glad to see a big bowl of other car keys on the table in the entryway. The host tossed Colby's keys into the bowl and told us to have fun before stepping back outside and closing the door. We went and found our room, which had 2 double beds and a tiny balcony that looked out over the water. We put our stuff away and went back downstairs. Lena was really eager to find her friends, so we followed her. It didn't take long to figure out where the main lounge was. It was this giant open room on the first floor that had full glass windows all around, so you could get a wraparound view of the water. It was honestly pretty awesome. There must have been at least 30 people hanging out in that one room. But the weird thing was that Lena didn't recognize a single one of them. They all looked like college kids, even Greek life people. But Lena couldn't find her friend or anyone else she knew in the crowd. I wasn't just going to stand there in the corner. So I walked over to the fridge, grabbed a beer for myself and Colby, and made my way over to the pool table, which no one was using. I've never had a hard time meeting new people, so I didn't really care that we didn't know anyone. Colby didn't seem to care either. We played pool, talked, drank, and just enjoyed the vibe. Our girlfriends came over a little later and told us Lena's friend wasn't answering her phone. They seemed really worried about it, but Colby and I told them it was fine, and it was fine. I'm not going to lie. The first night was actually really fun. Colby and I hung out with a bunch of people who were all really cool. Anna and Lena got along with the girls, and there seemed to be an endless supply of drinks and games. There was one thing that was bothering me even with all the fun I was having. It was the host. He wasn't really partying, but was always there walking through the rooms and sometimes talking to people. My first thought was that he was enjoying some stronger stuff in some back room with a few chosen people. But I felt like that was unlikely because I never saw a drink in his hand. At one point, I saw him standing near the back door with a clipboard, like an actual real clipboard with paper on it, and he was writing something down. Most of the party felt like strangers getting to know each other, which is kind of what I expected, but there were maybe 8 to 10 people who acted around each other differently. At first, I just thought a big part of the group already knew each other, but I couldn't help but notice that some of the people who seemed familiar with each other introduced themselves during games and stuff. As more time passed, I also noticed that the 4 of us weren't joining one bigger group that all knew each other, but instead the whole group was split into a bunch of smaller groups like ours. Besides those 10 or so people, no one knew anyone besides the people they had come with. I mentioned it to Anna, and she said I was overthinking things, which was probably true. She was also pretty drunk at that point, so I wasn't going to make things harder. Lena's friend never showed up that first night. The next morning, I woke up earlier than everyone else. I went down to the kitchen and made myself a coffee. Then, I went out on the deck to sit by myself for a while. I noticed that the bowl with everyone's keys wasn't by the front door anymore, which was a little odd. I wanted to be left alone, so I chose to sit on the side of the house with the driveway to my left and the water to my right. It was actually really peaceful. Around mid-morning, I noticed a couple I'd seen the night before packing up their stuff. They said goodbye to a few people, and I watched them drive out of sight. Fast forward to later that night, and we were sitting by the bonfire. I was sitting with Anna and a few other people when I happened to glance across the fire toward the far end of the circle. There was a couple sitting together a little further back from the group than everyone else. They were sitting with the fire between us, which made it harder to get a clear look, but I kept watching. I realized it was the same guy and girl from earlier, the ones who had left in the morning. I was totally sure of it. I told Anna, and she gave me this confused look. She hadn't seen them leave, so she probably thought I was remembering wrong. There wasn't much I could do to convince her. So instead, I just got up and went straight through the house. I remembered which car was theirs, so I was going to see if it was still gone. I made it to the driveway, and to my surprise, the car wasn't there. Even so, I was sure the people I had seen were the ones who had left, but by the time I got back to Bonfire, they were gone. I couldn't find them anywhere, and it bugged me for the rest of the night. I didn't bother telling Colby or Lena, and every time I mentioned it to Anna, she told me I was being a crazy buzzkill. The next morning, I made a point to wake up really early again. I wanted to go for a walk. I'm not really sure what I was looking for, but I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't trapped and that there was something outside that house and those people. About a quarter mile down the road, past a bend where you couldn't see anything from the house, there was an equipment shed, some kind of storage building for groundskeeping workers. I walked around it and my jaw nearly hit the floor. It was the couple's car from the day before. I was sure of it. I just stood there. I don't know how long. I wasn't scared. It was more like proof of something I already knew, but hadn't been able to show. I turned around and walked back to the house without telling anyone. I was starting to freak out after that. Why would someone pretend to leave? And then I started thinking about those people they had been saying goodbye to, and I wondered if they weren't on it as well. I knew what I had to do. That afternoon, I found that couple near the dock. It took me a really long time to find them, and I had to make up some __ excuse to tell Anna. I didn't even soften it. I just bluntly asked them if they had left the morning before. They both gave me a funny look and acted like I was crazy, but I could tell my question hit a nerve. I swear to God, though, it was like everyone around could hear our conversation. There weren't that many people around, but while I was standing there, everyone got a little quieter, and I couldn't help but feel like there were eyes on me. Luckily, Anna appeared out of nowhere and told me to have a drink with her. I first wanted to push that couple, but the way everyone else reacted made me feel deeply uncomfortable in a way that's hard to describe. I told Anna everything, and she actually took me seriously when I brought up the car detail. Then she went on to tell me that she had picked up on some weird stuff herself, like some of the girls having almost the same backstories and stuff like that. I suggested leaving early, but she told me that was probably too soon. Either way, the bad feeling I got on the first day was getting worse and worse. By the time I woke up the next morning, I made the choice that we were leaving. Anna agreed. Colby and Lena were a different story. Colby straight up laughed at me. He said he wasn't cutting the trip short because I had a theory. Lena admitted it was weird that her friend had basically ghosted her and that she didn't recognize a single person in the house, but she wasn't ready to panic over a parked car. We argued about it for a little while, and I was actually shocked by how stubborn they were both being. It's not like Anna, and I could have left on our own. We needed Colby's car. We ended up making a deal, and the plan was to stay one final night. I was cool with that until we went downstairs for breakfast. Every single pair of eyes was on me. I felt it, and I didn't like it. It wasn't obvious, and I tried convincing myself I was just having a paranoid freakout. But people were definitely looking at me. A lot of people, which I found really weird because most of the people that were looking at me hadn't even been part of the group that had seen me question that couple. I started feeling like something really, really terrible was going to happen if we stayed in that house for even a moment longer. Anna felt the eyes too, because she whispered to me that people were looking. I got up from where we were sitting and walked right over to the host, who was standing near the corner of the room. I told her we had to leave and that I needed my keys. He smiled like a robot, then asked if everything was okay. I told him something came up and we needed to head home, to which he actually asked, "What happened?" I hadn't thought of a fake excuse, so I just told him it was a family emergency. He kept changing the subject, saying things like, some people had planned a boat thing for the evening, and that the nights always get better as the end of the week comes. He was doing everything he could to get me to stay, all while still smiling at me like a creep. I didn't care. I told him again that I needed the keys. I cannot put into words how awful that feeling was. There was a room full of at least 20 people, and every single one of them was staring at me. The host didn't respond, and his Mr. Charming Guy act was gone. He wasn't smiling anymore. He gave this blank, dead-eyed look that creeped me out. Some random girl who was sitting nearby broke the silence by saying, That's not a good idea. I turned around to look at her, and she was glaring at me. I didn't know what to say. I looked across the room and saw Anna, Lena, and Colby, and they all looked horrified. The host finally said, "Okay, fine," or something like that, and told me to follow him inside. I saw Anna getting up to follow me, but when he saw her move, he put his hand out and said no, in a loud, aggressive way that really startled me. It was almost violent. He told me that only I was to follow him, so that's what I did. He led me through a maze of hallways before we reached a room with everyone's keys hanging on hooks. He didn't even ask me which set was mine. He just picked them out because he clearly already knew. I thought he was going to attack me or keep the keys from me, but he handed them to me. Then he said, "You're making a mistake." I didn't give A__. As soon as I had the keys in my hand, I made my way back over to my group. When I got back to that main room, the music was back on, and people were laughing and talking again like nothing had happened. It was creepy. Anna, Colby, and Lena were in the same spot, and I told them we were leaving. We were packed and out of there in 10 minutes. The whole time, I felt like someone was going to try and stop us, but no one did. As Colby started driving off, I looked back at the house to see the most disturbing thing yet. There were about a dozen people standing on the deck, watching us leave. They were standing in a line, not talking, and it was very clear they were watching us. I noticed a couple more people looking through windows, which pretty much confirmed what I had been suspecting all along. There was something up with that house. For the rest of the break, Lena tried to get in touch with a girl who had supposedly set up the trip. She called and texted and tried every platform she could think of, but got absolutely nothing back. She was starting to think something had actually happened to her. It wasn't until we were back at school that Lena finally tracked the girl down. This is honestly the craziest part of the story. It turned out that her phone had been stolen about 2 weeks before spring break. She had gotten a new number, but hadn't told everyone yet. The person who told Lena about the plan wasn't her friend. It was some stranger. Not a single message came from her. We talked about going to the police, but none of us could explain what crime had actually been committed against us. We went to a party. It was weird. Nobody technically did anything, but it was off to the point where I felt like one more night of that would have had some kind of consequence. One that I can't even imagine. This is something I'll never stop thinking about, mostly because it's such a mystery, and the more you think about it, the less it makes sense.